Hello, all you there out in YouTube land. This is Eric Pepe again. It is December 12th, 2021, and I think this is my fifth video. I haven't figured out how to get the videos off of this onto YouTube yet, but hope springs eternal in the human breast. And by hope, of course, I don't mean hope. I mean, what's that other word that has nothing to do with hope at all? Despair, that's it. Despair at the complete insouciance of the American people and all other people to what is going on with their government. There's not much to see in this one. Here are my Koss headphones that I got in prison. They're really quite good, surprisingly good. I have my Spock mug, which I bought at Walmart of all places. And Spock, of course, is kind of an ironic commentary on rationalism and Enlightenment thought and the need for postmodern approaches to this idea of thought and cognition and all of that. As usual, I'll tell you things that you've spent your entire life avoiding learning about your government, and I doubt you'll change. And then I'll get to something that might be academically interesting. So, the YouTube Mr. Roboto has somehow decided that I want to see videos about Jordan Peterson, which I don't because he's an idiot. But sort of accidentally, probably, and stochastically, it brought up a video by someone named Tom Nicholas about how Jordan Peterson misunderstands Orwell, which of course he does. And then I got one about postmodernism. Now, I was a little reluctant to see something about postmodernism, but he put the Magritte pipe on the title page, and the Magritte, well, it's not a pipe, of course, is really a perfect logo for postmodernism. Now, all throughout my academic career, I was a geek, and I shared the prejudice against postmodernism because I had no idea what it was. And as Howland Owl once said, if I is so smart, why is I so stupid? Stupid! You're so stupid! As Weird Al put it in UHF. So, this all changed when the Appalachian Prison Book Project, or program, or something like that, I'm too lazy to look it up, sent me a copy of Ryan and Rivkin's Literary Theory. I wondered why and ignored it for a couple of years. However, during the first year of the plague, when I was confined to my cell, I decided to read it, and it was incredible and multiple revelations. First, I discovered that Nietzsche, whom I'd been a great fan of, wrote a little essay called On Truth and Lie in an Extramoral Sense. It was published posthumously. And just from the passage that was in that book, I realized that Nietzsche had prefigured pretty much all of cognitive linguistics. But the cognitive linguists seem to be completely unaware of it. In fact, the only reference to Nietzsche in Lakoff's oeuvre, so to speak, that I've been able to find was, let's just call it profoundly ignorant. In physics, we have a concept of a statement that is so bad that it isn't even wrong. Now, I also had some other fragments of that essay, one in Otto Manley Zorn and one from Kaufman, Walter Kaufman, who is, of course, a classic. And using a pen and a pad of paper, I put together a synthesis of it. It's an exquisite little essay, and I highly recommend it. I wrote about this to George Lakoff, And of course, I never received a reply because nobody wants to respond to, and I'll scan this so that you can read it. A Jew, the federal government accused of being not only an Islamic terrorist, but an atheist, Russian, nudist, misogynistic, pedophiliac, Jewish Islamic terrorist from Lubbock, Texas. Now, I didn't include the most offensive thing they accused me of, which was that I was still using Usenet this millennium. And of course, I really had no idea where Lubbock, Texas was. In prison, I managed to find an atlas. They don't allow us street maps in prison for some stupid reason. But Lubbock appears to be in the top hat kind of part of Texas, if you know what I mean. So the next after this, I learned about the tradition of Saussurian linguistics, and sometimes it's called semiotics, and it was really awesome as well. The other thing is that cognitive linguists completely ignore that tradition, except for Hilary Putnam, and they don't know what tradition he comes from. Again, this is deep prejudice and stupidity. Now, on the outside here, supposedly, in what I laughingly call the real world, I have only been able to find one reference to one person who might have some idea about this. But he doesn't return my emails because, well, same reason that Lakoff. Who would want to deal with something icky as that? That's as bad as blood libel. You don't have to worry about whether the accusation is true or not because Americans don't care about that. Then I learned about the tradition of postmodernism, which was what happened pretty much when the structuralists, who are Saussurians, discovered Nietzsche in the 1950s and mostly in the 1960s. It's really rather good stuff. In fact, Jacques Derrida, or Derrida, or whatever it is, who I had been always trained to think of as the evilest post-mo or pomo of them all, came up with some rather good stuff. The only problem is you have to sit down and read it, and if you can get over the really unpleasant Frenchness of it all, you'll find some good stuff. As I was reading Lakoff's categorization theory by prototypes, I noticed that something was missing. Not knowing what to call it, I called it discerption. But it turns out that Derrida came out with the term difference, but spelled with an A rather than an E, and deconstruction, and it's exactly the same thing. So I'm going to summarize the postmodern era and postmodernism. From about 300 CE onward is what I call the alchemical period. In the alchemical period, what I laughingly called real world was consistently interpreted as a kind of imperfect reflection of a perfect mystical or spiritual world. Some people call this metaphysical, and the word metaphysical is kind of a stupid word because Aristotle wrote a book called Physics, and then he wrote another book. And that book had such a long title that nobody can remember it, and certainly you don't want to write it down. And so they called it Metaphysics for the book after he wrote Physics. Get it? All right, so we had that, and that maintained until the idiot Descartes resurrected Aristotelian ideas. And that, at least in Europe, is called the classical period. Now, that was attacked almost immediately by Fontevelle around 1680 or 1690. And of course, Nietzsche had absolutely no patience with that claptrap whatsoever. But then it maintained for a while. Then the Industrial Revolution happened, and Adam Smith happened, and that inaugurated what is called the modern period. Well, let me see. About the classical period, the idea was, or sometimes called the Enlightenment, was that everybody is rational and they have a rational engine and it's completely neutral, and rationalism was the way to go, and it was going to solve everything. The invisible hand. So, the Industrial Revolution pointed out, oh, now we've got some new technology. And so technology and science were going to solve everything. Now, I want to point out that Karl Marx, the political guy, or not Karl Marx, the piano tuner, was, like Millie, thoroughly modern. And a lot of people still like him for some reason, but my attitude is I really don't need another clueless, dead European to pretend that he knew what he was talking about with respect to a world he didn't live in and had no experience in. Well, science is going to fix everything. And then we dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and then another one on Nagasaki, because it was so popular, we needed a sequel. And that quite literally smashed modernism. And so now we are in the postmodern age, and people call it postmodern probably because they have no idea what it is. And it is characterized by a situation in which you can't really tell what reality is, because you are assaulted by all of these highly convincing synthetic ideas of reality. First on the TV, which of course was famously used by Hitler in the Olympics. And now we have computers and we have CGI, which my first of several careers was devoted to doing. And it's really very difficult to separate reality from fantasy. To that end, there is postmodernism. Now, postmodernism is not, as we Jews say, a thing. It is a desperate attempt to make sense of something that is extremely confusing. As William Goldman put it in the Adventures in the Screen Trade, nobody knows anything. And so, most of it, of course, is stupid for exactly the same reasons that Aristotle's physics was stupid. Nobody has any idea of how to do it. And a lot of people are trying a lot of different things pretty much randomly. Most of them, of course, will turn out to be wrong, but probably not for the reasons Jordan Peterson and idiots like him like to say. We cannot go back to Enlightenment thought because, as George Lakoff and many others point out, it completely fails to explain cognition. The kind of randroid idea that logic comprises the laws of thought is empirically wrong. And it's so very desperately easy to see that. There are a few holdouts, like Noam Chomsky, another idiot, but they're wrong. Still, we don't know what's right. and you'll see a lot of completely stupid stuff. And I approve of it because people are trying. Maybe sometime we'll get to an idea where some of the good ideas will win and the bad ideas will be cast into the dustbin of history. This sometimes happens. And if you look at history at all, you can see that. If you look at the history of science, you can see that. We don't talk about phlogiston anymore. People who know better don't talk about wave-particle duality anymore. We have better ideas, but they take a very long time to figure out, and a lot of people have to do it, and we have to do it by trial and error. And there is going to be a lot of error, but don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Of course, the baby is really only a blastula at this point, and we can't distinguish the baby from the nonsense. But that's postmodernism in a nutshell, and I'm going to stop now. Bye-bye.